pleased that so many of you came. I do hope that my students are there as well. So I'm truly very pleased to be here. So this will be a 1-hour lecture. I hope that it is not too frightening, and I will read it. The reason is that it is quite new for me as well. It is a very fresh stuff. It will be the first time that I will deliver this lecture. First, I will deal a little bit with theory, and then I will show you a lot of pictures. Okay? The title is, Whose Time Is It Anyway? Does it work? Okay. Yep. The future is behind us, the past is ahead of us. In this presentation, I wish to elaborate on space and time and on how they are articulated in various theories and what is out there for our region. Different peripheries has different relations to space and time. Eastern Europe and East Central Europe within is especially preoccupied by space, place, locality, that is, with geopolitics, while largely ignores the question of time. Even the name and metaphors used for the proposed theory of art history offered by and for the region is spatial. Horizontal art history was coined by late Piotrowski. Postcolonial theories oscillate between space and time, mingling around the question of having or lacking visibility or voice. Decolonial option, the newest theory on the field, a theory originated in Latin America and in the Caribbean, is not really bothered by the notion of place, but focuses instead on time and also visibility. Rolando Vázquez, who formulated the concept of the institution of politics of time, and actually this was the trigger for me to this lecture, argues that chronology and imposition of modern time are at the heart of the modern colonial system of oppression. And therefore, resistance against hegemonic globalization should question the universality of modern time. In the timeline, if modern Europe was established as the present, then the past was the other. Therefore, Vázquez fights against this temporal otherness and as a way out suggests to return to the past. Let's then consider and check it out. What is it in it for us if we turn to chronopolitics instead of geopolitics? Well before the temporal turn, as we might call the new attention towards time, in 1983, Johannes Fabian, an anthropologist, recognized, quote, "It was only possible for Western powers to aspire control over the rest of the globe's culture if they were characterized not only as spatially exotic, but also as temporally backward. Time's location, the place where time mattered, was in the West." Nicholas Mirzov, an art historian located in New York, connects the intersection of time with space to racial issues, arguing that white supremacy writes about race in terms of time. Quote, "White races are advanced or civilized, while non-white race designated as backward or barbaric. A dichotomy we familiar with from the center-periphery West-East binary." What about contemporaneity, or as it was called, multiple temporalities or heterogeneity of temporalities, which is the collateral theory of globalization coined by Terry Smith, and which grew out of the frustration over the controversy that if the space of the world and art production extended via globalization, it could not be the West anymore and alone where time mattered. So for now, there is a general critical consensus that artistic production was no longer motivated by its relation to time. However, the promise of happy coming togetherness to celebrate contemporaneity is also troubled with pitfalls. Keith Moxie, a critical art historian converging around visual time, his book just came out, the title is Visual Time, calls our attention to some hidden traps of this new theory of contemporaneity. Quote, "The strategy which evades the lure of universal time nevertheless fails to engage with the possibility that time possesses many dimensions and textures. The heterochronous trajectories traversed by different cultures are rejected in favor of non-time that flattens and obliterates specificities of geographical and cultural location. So this is a featureless as he regards contemporaneity, which registers difference in neither time nor culture." If so, it seems that the theory of contemporaneity is not really the perfect fit for us. If so, let's get back to the concept of the temporal other coined by Vázquez. The question for us is that, what is to be done with the decolonial option with regard to Eastern Europe? The presupposition of the concept are not alien to the region. On one hand, the imposition of modern time is also a concern for this region as it relegated the peripheries of Europe into a secondary position and to the past. Thus, the center imagined its margins as a past of its own relevant present. Location of time, the place where time mattered, was in the center in the Western world, and little space was given for temporal differences. On the other hand, though Eastern Europe has not been colonized in the strict meaning of the word, it has been under Soviet dominance for almost half a century. Okay, the main difference, however, is that after the collapse of the Soviet satellite system, the crucial dilemma was which past to return to and which past was to be erased. In this regard, even the East-East time was different. On the top of that, the past that we are to return to was often designated by the new nationalist state power. Consequently, the decolonial catchphrase of returning to the past was not a theoretical or a rhetorical question, but was rather the political and cultural reality for the region. Moving back in time, Eastern Europe has always had its own obsession with time and with the past. Larionov and Goncharova's Rayonist and Futurist Manifesto, written in 1913, has the slogan that future is behind us, which I use here, which rejected the race against time in the tumultuous period of style and isms in Paris. The enigmatic phrase could mean that to be foreseeing the future, we should look back, or we should look inside. In this concept, future and past are not rigid and hierarchical conception, but could be easily reversed. As for the space of art and culture, in their view, it is located in the East and originates in local tradition. So the manifesto proposes to turn to the locality and to the past for inspiration. Students, familiar, right? Okay. As for the place, because we dealt with this manifesto, as for the place, the manifesto declares with enthusiasm, long live the beautiful East. We are joining forces with contemporary Eastern artists to work together. As for the West, The Manifesto declares that we are against the West, which is vulgarizing our forms, and Eastern forms, which is bringing down the level of everything. Leaders of various authoritarian systems in the past and in the present also imagine themselves as artists able to transform space in large scale and also to change trajectory of time. Erich Michod, in his book Cult of Art in Nazi Germany, quotes Goebbels' novel Michael, quote, a statesman is also an artist. For him, Hitler, the people are merely what stone is for sculptor. Stalin was also frequently referred to as an artist, as an architect or engineer of the proletarian state of communism. Stalin's pet project, the Palace of Soviets, was the symbol of proletarian architecture. As Susan Buckmore theorizes it, this, quote, example of the Soviet sublime is a fantasy object that must be imagined into existence on gigantic scale. The idea of sublime, one of overcoming the physical limits of the collective worker who will build it. The latter are required to sacrifice themselves as sensory beings in order to build a new world for the proletarian masses. In proportion as their own physical selves are diminished, the collective is enhanced in symbolic form. Yes. In her account, the notion of sublime is introduced, but not in its romantic meaning, which is connected to some extraordinary, untamed natural landscape far away from cities. Buckmore's notion of sublime resonates rather on a much wider definition to be found in Edvard Burke's account, who extended the notion to everything, anything earthly, even human constructions. In his typology, huge proportion, grand scale, the panoramic view, the dramatic verticality also applies to the category of sublime. Regarding the Polish architectural historian Michalski, quote, the ambition of harness the power of the extraordinary, the unexpected and intense lay at the very core of the Stalinist model for transformative acculturation through architecture. In his account, Stalinist sublime, as he names it, has an inherent purpose. The otherworldly realm to evoke was clearly defined as the sublime goal of earthly communism, to contribute to creation of a new political economic reality. No, not yet. The still standing symbol of Warsaw from the socialist time, Palace of Culture and Science, also regarded as Stalin-era articulation of theories about architectural power, a planned sublime. The palace complex, macrophobia or microphilia, or even sexual obsession with the palace could stem from its phallocentric authority, so much so that the local population is still unable to stay neutral about it, as Michalski's research demonstrates it. In Kant's and also Burke's account of sublime, pain and terror experienced by the beholder is also an important effect. Accordingly, in the chapter named Imperial Sublime, Catherine Clark, in his new book, Moscow, the fourth Rome, extends the notion of sublime as a spatial category to a timely one, to a whole time period, to the 30s, darkest time of the great purges, stating that, quote, the appropriation of sublime imagery by the Soviet rhetorics of the late 30s was a move to make Soviet reality adequate to the terror. As for explanation, she claims that Stalinist Russia, in Stalinist Russia, the sublime was very functional as a source of narrative strategies for effectively naturalizing Stalinist power. Sublime in its romantic understanding through dramatic landscape could also nurture national identity in the time of the birth of the nation. On the ground that we are able to perceive infinity in space and time, spatial and temporal magnitude is beyond all comparison. I would argue that motion in time, especially backwards, that is time travel, could also function as sublime, utilized by recent nationalist and populist regimes. Based on this, one might consider Kossuth Square in Budapest, Hungary, as an example of post-socialist nationalist sublime, which is focused on time rather than space. In order to uncover the drive behind this contemporary sublime, let's get back to Mirzov's essay on the clock of the world, in which he argues that in revolutionary times, actors experience the future in real time. I would argue that in reactionary time, actors experience the past in real time. Mirzov elaborates his argumentation around his thesis, Black Lives Matters. In this thesis, Haitian Revolution is exemplary as it fulfilled the ethical demand of victory over death, social death, from which black slaves were suffering, over victory of death, over the non-life of living. The opening statement of the 1804 Constitution in Haiti, it is, slavery is forever abolished. In his interpretation, in Mirzov's interpretation, mixes past, present, and future to end social death, as white mastery became future impossibility. As he continues, this clause, slavery is forever abolished, undid colonialism and sought to foreclose any future possibility of white supremacy, neo-colonialism, or segregation, also to simply be present in the colonial space, and also rewriting blackness as revolutionary affiliation and abolition of slavery. As for the timely fantasy of the Hungarian rightist regime dreaming back itself to the interwar period, it undid socialism. That is, literally erased the past. All the visible traces of the past of a whole generation was diminished, and the imagined national past was enhanced in symbolic politics. The square in recent form offers a time travel back in time to the 20th century in a literal meaning, as its 1944 spectacle has been recently meticulously reconstructed, erasing its overall image of the socialist time as if communism never happened. The imagination is in line with the rhetoric that Hungarian sovereignty was lost during the 2 consecutive occupations of the country, first by the Nazis and by the Soviets. This is the official statement and argumentation. To complete the Hungarian regime's time travel into the past, research institutions of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, among them Institute for Art History, which I was affiliated with, long residing in the Buda Castle, were expelled in order to make space for the governmental offices and for the king of the imagined kingdom, and to move physically and symbolically to the old historic aristocratic quarter of the city, from past its modern bourgeois part. And if the imagined king wishes to have the city lay at his feet and stare down at his people, the commoners, from a huge balcony, his desire is fulfilled, disregarding the strict rules against adding new elements to heritage buildings. As of today, the process, today is not just symbolically saying today. The process of forcing out institutions from their place, it continues with the aim of destruction of the academy's independence and self-government. According to Clark, most theoreticians define sublime in connection to an experience of power. In our case, it is not just symbolically, but also physically is connected to the reigning regime, as the square is in front of the Hungarian parliament. This power demonstration is directed to the nation, whose national horizon is expanded, also a sublime element, to the mythic land Transylvania through the secular flag hanging together with the Hungarian national one, actually the secular substituting the European Union flag on the building. Thus, what we are witnessing is the naturalizing the nationalist power. Although there is no direct connection between the statues in Kossuth Square and the Treaty of Trianon, as they are not explicitly revisionist statues, however, there is a connection in the eyes of the beholder, who are well aware that Count István Tisza was an adamant proponent of Hungarian supremacy. His statue is frequently honored with a wreath in the form of Greater Hungary. In the post-socialist, nationalist sublime, we also should consider distress, pain, and grief as a sublime component based on Burke's typology, who claims that, quote, the person who grieves suffers his passion to grow upon him, he indulges it, he loves it. Griefs should be willingly endured, though far from a simply pleasing sensation. It is the nature of grief to keep its object perpetually in its eye. This corresponds with the phenomenon that many nations elevate symbols signifying their own defeat to the center of their national mythology. The symbolic moments of national subjugation are pervasive in those nations' own perception of their own history. According to Emil Durkheim, the nation acts as a secular substitute to religion in the modern age. If so, then sacrifice, which is so fundamental to religion, must also exist in the nation. Followers of Durkheim have suggested that it is not culture, not language, not ethnicity, not even territory, as it has been generally conceived, what serve as a real cement of the nation, but the shared memory of blood sacrifice. The function of sacrifice and symbol of defeat is that they create a connection with the past and provide a sense of historical injustice or grievance around which the community can be mobilized, actually sidetracking it from real existing problems of the present. Needless to say that recurring future loss or fantasy of the upcoming defeat, or even the vision or fantasy of the death of the nation, serves the same function, as we can see in the ongoing campaign against migrants. The fear of extinction, the negative, as well as the domineering aspect of sublimity, all connected to mental terror, also contributes to the discourse, since sublime, terrifying, because it cannot be presented to the mind in the form of clear and distinct idea. Through sublime, power and authority come into play to transform masses into obeying commanders' will. Longinus, who originally coined the notion of sublime, speaks about the discourse of domination. He considered it as the highest level of an orator's speech who is able to overwhelm and enhance his audience and prevent it to appeal to reason, which element also appropriated and greatly utilized by recent populist regimes. Get back to Russia. As of Russia, it is also characterized by symbolic visual time travel, as after the fall of socialism, the iconic building of Tsarist Russia, Cathedral of Christ the Savior, was meticulously reconstructed at the very same place where once the cathedral stood, but was demolished under Stalin to create space for the palace of Soviets. In Mirzov's argumentation, it was the Haitian Revolution that made possible to be present regardless of past histories. We might ask, what is the pervasive subtext of Štúra's centennial commemoration of the 1970s Russian Revolution that alludes to Haitian Revolution by its zombie scenography? The video is actually on the web. Štúra uploads all the videos, so you can find, if you would like to see it, it's 36 minutes video on their website. The video isn't celebratory or monumental. Its genre is a lecture performance in front of the Winter Palace given by Oksana Timofeyeva. We see her in the middle, a philosopher and member of the group. The concept of the video is based on her Manifesto for Zombie Communism, which is a dystopic interpretation of Russian Revolution, quote, stating that only those who are desperate are ready to die in a struggle that is driven not by hope for a better future, but rather by the impossibility of living in the present. While she elaborates on the concept of zombie centennial, evoking the dark side of the mass uprising that concluded with mass massacre, zombies provide backstage performance. Thus, zombie serves as a metaphor emerging from what could be termed the perspective of the damned. They jerk and shuffle around in the dark, their body parts moving of their own accord in an outdoor theater, we do know from the revolutionary times, set in Palace Square, known from the reenactment of the revolution in Einstein's famous movie on the right corner, in the right corner. At the first glance, it is a skeptical, negative interpretation of the revolution from the perspective of the younger generation, born or raised after the collapse of the Soviet Union, or a manifestation of radical political pessimism, as labeled by Anna Janevsky, the curator of the show, this Štúra show. Zombie culture generally reads as subversive and possibly even leftist. In this context, in the review of Hyperallergic, the posh online magazine, the video is a critic of global neoliberal capitalism, which fills all the gaps left behind by the war of ideologies with consumerism, present even at Palace Square. You can make photo with the royalties and with the mistress of the Tsar, a ballerina. Present even at the Palace Square, it conveys a rather depressive message of nothing left from the great utopia of progress and humanistic ideas, except for the freedom of mindless consumers to choose from different brands on the market. In my opinion, the mesmerizing video is more complex than this. So let's elaborate on this. The origin of the zombie, the living dead, the soulless container deprived of freedom and characterized by loss and dispossession, goes further back than the zombie culture of our time, resonating on multiple recent anxieties and popularized by Hollywood movies. The word and the notion come from Haitian Creole, originally in Haitian folklore, denoting the dead who have been reanimated. Oops. Yes. The dead who had been reanimated. It is also this hopelessness, this hopeless state that all the misery and subjugation of the slave population was projected into, symbolizing endless slavery even after death. They imagined being trapped forever in their bodies, unable even to enter their own paradise after they die. It referred to the anxieties of modern slavery in the colonies, to the inhuman experience of slaves on the sugar plantations where humans were denied control of their own bodies as ensured by the Le Code Noir, which permitted torture or mutilation of the slaves by the master. Of all the colonies of the time, Haiti was the most productive and relied on heavy transportation of people from West Africa. Since due to the brutal work and life conditions, life expectancy was so short that the colony, providing wealth to the rising French bourgeoisie, needed constant supply. After the unprecedented Haitian Revolution, which grew out of despair, articulated in the slogan of death or freedom, that was their slogan, Death or Freedom. Its meaning was inverted. It was now the white colonizers' horror of emancipated black slaves that came to resemble a fear of hordes of soulless undead. The vengeful revolt terrified the so-called civilized world. Accordingly, black people were demonized. Actually, nobody was bothered, not even philosophers of the Enlightenment, among them Hegel, who were informed by the correspondent of their journal, Minerva, about the conditions and events in the colonies, by the discrepancy between the discourse of freedom and the practice of slavery, nor by the contradiction that the victorious French Revolution had the same slogans and led to the biggest achievements of humanity, that is freedom, the category from which black slaves were excluded despite fighting under the same banner in the same time. The so-called black Jacobins crossed the line between races and between slave and master. Culturally speaking, they crossed the well-patrolled border between the so-called civilized, enlightened Europe and the source of its well-being and prosperity, the barbaric world of the colonies. Cultural racism served to keep the machinery going, as the noble principles of enlightenment were not applied to those who were left behind and were betrayed by the civilization. Later, the metaphor of monstrosity and abject were applied to the motley crew, masses of outcasts in Europe, whilst the onset of continental capitalism to the masses of free laborers, the proletariat, whose work conditions were not that far from that colonial slaves. Getting back to the other revolution, the idea of self-liberation through trial by death, the idea behind the Haitian Revolution, is echoed in Lenin's idea of, quote, readiness for death for the revolutionary cause, which Timofeyeva regarded as almost criminal. The French Revolution The French Revolution wasn't soft on its enemies either, as we do know, but its cruelty was justified in the name of progress. However, in the row of three revolutions, they are not judged equally. The French Revolution is seen beyond dispute as the cradle of the modern civilized world and is celebrated worldwide. There is an ambivalence assessing the Russian one, even in Russia, let alone outside of it, but it is still widely remembered. As for the Haitian Revolution, it fell into total oblivion, or is regarded marginal for world history. So in my reading, the Štúra video is the problematization of this uneven assessment of French, Haitian, and Russian Revolution in the discourse. Concerning the metaphor of zombie, it is far from obsolete. Nowadays, they are the refugees, the migrants, who are treated like waste, hordes of zombies between life and death, and before whom nation-states close their gates. The recent Hungarian cultural ecosystem is about to erase all revolutions, all of them, from the local discourse, but especially the 1990 Hungarian Soviet Revolution. I do not know whether Adam Albert arrived. Are you here? No, okay. The artist with whom I will deal with now, yeah. at the onset of its centennial anniversary and enunciate contemporary artworks that address the issue. In 1770, at the onset of French Revolution, now I would like to jump back a little bit. Louis-Sébastien Mercier wrote a futuristic novel entitled The Year 2440, A Dream If It Ever Was, a blueprint for humanity's progress, predicted the revolution to come, the French Revolution. Now just a jump back in time. The book was considered the first of its kind, a temporal utopia, that is, utopia of the future, the function of which to change, reform, or revolutionize the world. In Mercier's vision, an enlightenment dream came true in 2440. Men of letters become the most respectable of citizens. In his word, every citizen was a writer, and the elite of merit was the new sovereign. Adam Albert, a Hungarian artist, also a learned historian, looks back So first I will show some photos of the 1990 Hungarian Revolution, looks back from the future to the 1919 Hungarian-Soviet Revolution at the onset of its centennial anniversary in this year, in March. In his solo show held in Kassák Museum, the exhibition entitled Everything is Ours focuses on just one day of the 133-day-long proletarian dictatorship, the May 1st celebration, with the assembly of monumental structures and artworks that laid claim to visual representation of the new world. The starting point of the research-based project is what Walter Benjamin claimed in his Archive project, and it's a very beautiful phrase, I like it very much, that history breaks down into images, not in stories. When the curator Judith Chatlos and the artist went after the agenda, description, choreography, or models of the decoration of the capital, Budapest, they hardly found any documents, but they did find lots of photographs. These photographs served as referential points to the objects made by the artist. The pieces reflect on the symbolic acts related to the production of goods and services and their redistribution, for example, allowing to use the bridges and city parks free of charge for everybody as the overture of the new, more just society. Now the exhibition of Adam Albert in Kassák Museum. The decorated bridgeheads are remade by the artist from different materials. Plywood, on the right corner, plywood is to evoke the cheap material used for decoration and actually used in monumental propaganda in Russia as well. Limestone, in the right corner, limestone was the favorite material of existing socialism in remembering the workers' movement. Plexiglass, in the other corner, refers to transparency, slogan of revolutionary time. The polyurethane foam induces, in this corner, induces the blurry, formless nature of the turbulent events. These objects are immaculate, sterile, imagined models for the decoration of the grandiose celebration. They appear for us, as the audience, as archaeological finds of visual sign looking back from the far future, which is unable to reconstruct the ranging event, the motivation behind violence and controversies, cleansed off by the passing time. Russian revolutionary art, now celebrated, collected by and exhibited in leading museums, originally aimed to create a new visual language, down to its basic elements. As radically revolutionary, detached from the old world, in the very same way as the political revolution. Artists consider themselves to be on equal footing with the political leaders in creating the new world. Thus, abstraction was not born out of the race of styles, but rather out of the dilemma that visuality of the proletariat could not be based on the artistic language of the bourgeois art. This is behind the slogan of death to the easel painting, as artists wanted to serve the revolution and participate in the creation of the breed of new human and the new world. In the course of museologization, the artifacts of Russian avant-garde went through a purification process, losing all their political intentions and connection. This is interior from MoMA, appreciated in the present as sacred and pure art above politics and everyday life. Through this lens is the revolutionary decoration of the May 1st, 1990, evoked by the artist of Adam Albert. They make us aware of the mechanism of art history, how art history works, and make palpable how history works in an obligatory, distant manner. Following Mercier's revolutionary dream in 2440, censorship is not eliminated, not at all, by means that only morally noble people's work has to be published. All those who have wrote a bad book, writes Mercier, bad book, which means dangerous principles, such as inconsistent with found morality, must wear a mask to hide his shame till he has effaced it by writing something more rational and beneficial to society. So they have to wear the mask until the point that they realize that they were not right morally. Imre Gábor, actually, he is with us. So if you will have questions regarding to his pieces, you can ask him as well. Imre Gábor's life-size, black and white paper prints made by trampling on them, laid on the ground, are dystopic evocations of what have remained from the visual culture of the present for the future, be they masterpieces of high art or iconic images of popular culture, figures of press photos, and also artworks. As the red hammer-wielding man made by Mihály Bíró, the person in charge of the decoration of 1919 revolution in Hungary. The giant worker figure became the symbol of the revolution. All figures of Imre Gábor's prints are wearing masks, which along with the equal size, black color, and skeletal character contribute to the uniformization and make them a frightening army of ghosts of culture of the past. Once the genre of the paper cutout silhouette portraits democratized portraiture long before the advent of photography. In their contemporary art mutations, however, no clue is given whether the figures, Imre Gábor's figures, are foreseeing the future and are wearing gas masks in order to survive a catastrophe to come, or whether they have already burned into ashes, resembling the figures once landmark of the so-called civilization that justified colonization and slavery. The black cutouts in their original context functioned as cataloging human property. There is an exhibition now with this title dealing with this topic in Washington, D.C., in the National Museum. Details were avoided and environment was not specified. Biographical specificities were added to only white slave owners. The two contemporary projects we have seen, Adam Albert's and Imre Gábor's, artistic project I introduced are the opposites of each other, diverse interpretation of the present seen from the future. One is lacking any human beings or feelings while avoiding any judgment, avoiding taking sides or politicization in an overtly politicized time. The other, containing exclusively human figures, real or created, and is full of eruptive motions, disturb and disturbing. However, both of them, even if unintentionally, diagnosed the present from the perspective of the future. Mercier's book was condemned by the Holy See in 1773 and by the Spanish Inquisition in 1778, while Kossuth Museum, its director, its curator, the authors of the catalogue, and the artist was personally harassed, politically attacked, and denounced in an extreme right-wing forum despite their neutrality, distance, scholarly attitude, and analytic nature. The attack was part of the systematic attack on the last bastions of liberal culture that was launched by the dictatorial curbing of the independence of art, culture, and science, which for now extended to an all-warfare against CU and Academy of Sciences. Mercier, getting back to this temporal utopia, wished for perfection and progress as compensation for the reality of his time. Today, however, his prophecy needs to be read conversely. What his generation suffered from and was hoping to be eradicated in the future, namely tyranny, once again, is the reality. I quote Mercier, "In my time, men in power feared nothing so much as the pen of an able writer. Their soul, proud and guilty, trembled in their inmost recesses when equity boldly plucked off the veil that covered their shame." Concerning the academy, because he imagines the society of writers and the merit of the man of letter, concerning the academy, he imagines the future as such. The number of our academicians is not fixed. Every talent receives the crown of its reward. There are sufficient to recompensate them all. This proved to be, we are concluding, I'm getting tired as well, not speaking about you, provided to be wishful thinking, as for now it works the other way around. His dream of an enlightened society based on reason, morality, and merit could not be further from the truth in 2019. To finish, I wish to demonstrate with some example from both sides, from both ends of the spectrum, the artifacts of official cultural politics and contemporary artworks, how difficult to adjust the slogan of the colonial option, returning to the past, into another periphery, Eastern Europe. Or, quite contrary, how easy it is to return to the distant past and jump over and erase the recent past, driven by political interest. Thank you very much. Oops. I'm sorry that I had to read it, but it is quite fresh, quite new for me too. So.
Thank you, Edith, for the lecture. And now also there is time for questions if you have. So just raise your hand and.
Thank you for the lecture. I'm sure that you already answered my question in your lecture, but probably, yeah, I didn't understand, so that's why I'm asking now. So you're basically showing us a parallel. That's a question now. Are you showing us a parallel of the kind of revisionist policy that we can see in Hungary, that tries to revert to a kind of pre-communist interwar period past, to the idea of the decolonial option, which departs from the assumption that if you decolonize the academics, if you decolonize, I don't know, everything, all aspects of life, you would be able to undo the colonial crimes and you would be able to revert to a pre-colonial society. Did I get that right?
So actually, not exactly. I relied only this one notion. This was the trigger for me, this whole lecture. When I read this text of Vázquez, who is one of the representatives of this decolonial option. So I just wanted to rely on this one aspect. And actually the reason is that the colonial option is so strong now and so advocating it's true, and we can think about many aspects of it. I just wanted to think about this one, returning to past, whether peripheries, because for example Piotr Piotrowski suggested the idea that let's periphery unite, all the peripheries unite, because somehow our region, Eastern Europe, kind of was left out from the competition or seems to be left out. So I just wanted to see that this one aspect could be useful for us or not. So I was obsessed by time. I'm not there yet to think about these other options offered by the colonial options. I will think about it, but I just started to relate to this new theory. And actually, I do see an example of that Mladena Tlostanova, who is working together with Mignolo, is from Russia. So she tries to connect this region and the colonial option. But I was quite upset because when she speaks about post-socialism, she regards the region as a homogeneous. Oh my God, we are again there, that we are homogeneous. And I'm totally against it because post-Soviet experience is not the same as post-socialist in our countries. So, but I'm not yet there. But I will go on this road. But yeah, decolonial option has something different as well, you are right.
So a brief comment on that. I remember when I heard first time about these decolonial ideas a couple of years ago, I was quite struck by this, by its regressiveness. You know, I considered, like, I didn't see any progressiveness in it. And actually, since you mentioned the name, I mean, for example, a theoretician like Mignolo, he has a big problem with anti-Semitism, for example. Like, he wrote the text that is, I don't know how known it is, but he wrote the text that is like pure anti-Semitic, you know? Like from a perspective like his to demand to revert back to something that was that existed before the colonizers came. I don't know, it sounds very suspicious to me. Very suspicious. I'm very suspicious about it.
At least it gives good food to think about. So I'm thinking about this way. It's interesting that they see aggressiveness because they, for example, absolutely against using the word decolonialism, and they say decolonial option. So kind of you can choose. It is, but yes, there is, of course, this is a phrase, this option, because it is just a rhetoric, so.
Thank you, Edith, for your amazing lecture. My question will be maybe trivial, but I just wanted to ask about the term which is related to the performance by Što dělat. You mentioned zombie communism, and I'm not sure if I understand well. Also, maybe it's relation to this image of Biro and Imre Gábor with this destructive, like, is it a destructive gesture, what, like with this hammer, and with this zombie communism. I don't know if I understood well, but when, for example, reading Andrei Platonov and his novels about the time, there it is indeed like zombie, like how he describes the countryside after the revolution and the effects of the revolution on the people. That like it is actually a document of the time. So and I'm not sure how if I understood well the connection to the situation that you described, like the connection, this parallel you made to migrants and to people that came to Hungary and were treated or as zombie, or but this destructive gesture. How could you a little bit explain like this parallel? For me, it's a little bit unclear. Like where is the literal connection?
With Što dělat.
With Što dělat, yes, with this zombie communism. Thank you.
Actually, they did not say that zombie communism, but they said that zombie centennial. Zombie centennial. This is the title of the piece. Okay. Zombie centennial. So it was their idea to celebrate or not to celebrate. So as they explained it was launched in MoMA, and then Anatoly and Anna Janevsky, they tried to explain that they were commissioned, they were told that we should somehow commemorate, let's put it this way, commemorate Russian Revolution, but there is this ambiguity even in Russia and outside, whether we should celebrate or rather we have to curse it, or if we do curse it, or if we do not deal with it. It is the Putin's politics who totally would like to forget about that. And the revolution itself, not Stalinism. So, but they do not want to celebrate it. So they decided, to create a kind of lecture performance with Timofeyeva, who is member of the group, and who wrote this manifesto. And I did find this connection with this part that they would even sacrifice their life for revolution, which she took out from Lenin's text and regarded as almost criminal. So they would not die, those many people, for the better future, but because it is so impossible to live in the present. So, but it's interesting, when it was asked whether they thought about connection with Haiti and so forth, they did not. Whether it was rhetorical or not, we do not know, we'll never know, but they absolutely didn't want to refer to that. And Platonov, that most probably it is in the horizon. I just wanted to connect these two notions. The revolutions, I wanted to circulate around revolution, and this was a kind of commemoration of the Russian Revolution. And in Hungary was this incident regarding this Hungarian revolution. I do not know whether I answered your question.
Yeah, and just a short question: is this gesture with hammer? Is it a distraction, or what is this? What is this person
the original one?
Distracting this? Yeah, the original one. Yeah.
The original one.
Yeah.
Actually, it was very influential figure, and it was used for different purposes. First, it was published in regard to Népszava, which was the journal of Socialist Democrat, and many meaning, actually many of them. So, would like to distract capitalism, the white power. So all kind of reading, and was used in very different meanings. But at that time, because he was in charge with the declaration of May 1st in the proletarian dictatorship, it was obviously this rebellious power of proletarian and worker.
It obviously has a gender, but one cannot see like
actually does
really
it have a gender?
Does it
have?
Doesn't. Yeah, I'm wondering. I'm asking like what this gesture in relation to the gender. I mean, for me, it's very
actually this
intriguing.
This is a very interesting question because. I'm getting tired. So it seems to be he's a man, but does not have any sexual organ. So Hedvig Turai dealt with this aspect of these works. That's absolutely no indication of any further emphasized sexual connotation. Yeah. So simply, the sexual organ is left out. Not covered, left out.
Okay. This could be also for a psychoanalytic study, but I leave the space
Yes.
for other questions. Yeah. Thank you.
And also, here is the artist, if you would like to ask him.
So if there are no questions, thank you for coming, and thank you again, Edith, for your lecture.